You can have the best forecast in the world, and if it's not getting to the right people in the right ways at the right time, we get tragedy.
Hello, I'm Chelsea Ingram, and welcome to AEM's Behind the Forecast, part of our Talking with the Experts podcast. On today's episode, we're talking with Bernadette Woods-Placky, Climate Central's VP for Engagement, Chief Meteorologist, and Director of the Climate Matters program. She's an Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, an AMS Fellow, and Penn State Earth and Mineral Science Fellow. At Climate Matters, Bernadette helps forecasters across the country connect local weather to broader environmental risks in ways that resonate with communities. Now let's dive in and go behind the forecast with Bernadette Woods-Placky. Bernadette, welcome to the show. It is so great to see you.
It is wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Climate Matters and Climate Central might be a new name to some of our listeners. So why don't you start with telling us what the organization is and what you have done?
Absolutely. So Climate Central is a nonprofit, non-governmental organization that's independent, policy-free, really focused on science and communication around climate change. We've been around since 2008. Now, within Climate Central, there's several different programs. We have a really robust program on sea level rise. We're building out climate services. We've always played in the journalism space in several different forms. And Climate Matters is a program. It started working with TV meteorologists and expanding out to supporting all journalists and really helping to advance climate reporting.
So, as the chief meteorologist at Climate Central, tell us what first drew you into meteorology. Was there a moment early on when you knew this was your calling? This is what you had to do?
So, as anyone who's weather focused listening to this knows, all meteorologists have their love of weather, right? This is not unique. And that's what's so fun about being in meteorology is we're all like this. My story was a little different, I think, than others. I always loved the weather, but I never thought of it as a profession until I was in college. Prior to that, my focus was really gymnastics. And then it was in state. I landed at Penn State and it became obvious that I should get into meteorology. But for those who don't know, Penn State's one of the top meteorology schools. So I always love to shout that out too. So that's how I got into this. But honestly, I always had that love of weather. And after I committed to the major, it just continued to grow.
Very cool. Very cool. So you've since made the leap, no pun intended, with your gymnastics background from forecasting the daily weather to now leading the Climate Matters program. What inspired that shift in your career?
You know, I'd like to say it was obvious with our changing climate and knowing that we needed to do more. But I don't think it was obvious to me in the moment. When I look back, that's what really drove me. And I'll take it back to my first job was at AccuWeather. When I graduated, I worked there for a few years before doing the television rounds. And what drove me from AccuWeather to television was that direct connection with the public to really, you see what these big storms are going to do. We see the impact they're going to have on people's lives. And this is true across meteorology, right? That we want to keep people safe and prepared. So while I was at AccuWeather, sometimes working through clients, I personally felt there was a delay in getting a warning out. Not for anyone's fault. It's just there's that extra layer. So that's the reason I even went into television, to have that direct line to the public. And so after 12 years in television, this opportunity presented itself. And when I spoke to the people at Climate Central, I really enjoyed their big thinking, change the world mentality. And so it's that same theme, really trying to keep people safe and prepared from the even bigger impacts of our weather getting more extreme over time.
And through Climate Matters, you've trained and you've supported hundreds of local TV meteorologists. What has that experience specifically taught you about how people learn and how forecasters can make science and risk more relatable?
There's a lot I've learned, but there are still a lot of basics. We've always viewed it as a partnership, working with people to get this information out to the public. So it is that balance of bringing knowledge and understanding and content and data and science, but also listening to our meteorologists and journalists and hearing where they may be getting caught on some of the science or which questions keep arising and how to connect them with the knowledge and the experts in various spaces to move things forward from their understanding, from data analysis and content, and then the support in telling that story. So those are the three buckets we've always viewed this program: the education, the content creation, and the support of the network.
And how have you been able to get through to those meteorologists that might have a different perspective when it comes to climate change? Have you seen the ability to be able to get through to more people? Has it been difficult? What has the challenge been like for Climate Central?
When I started, there was a survey done of the TV meteorology community, and I think it was 2011, right before I started. And at the time, only 54% of meteorologists were convinced that the climate was changing. That number was lower than the public at the time. So this comes back to what we were just talking about, of really listening to people and working with them. There were questions about the difference between weather and climate models. There were questions about data, what data sets to trust, what gaps in data are acceptable, how data is being processed and carried along and being analyzed. And so over time, helping to address those questions, by 2017, that same survey went out and 95% of TV meteorologists were convinced the climate was changing. So in my review and reflection of that, it wasn't that people were necessarily all against it. They just had questions and they were looking for a trusted source to be able to answer those questions or help them find answers to that. And sadly, this has become such a contentious subject that they were getting so much information from different sources that weren't trusted. So we were able to become that trusted partner in this process and to help navigate the science and the communication of it.
That's wonderful. That's amazing. And you really focus on solutions when it comes to these environmental changes, climate shifts that we're dealing with. And it sounds like solutions really resonate with honestly anyone.
They do. And it's a little bit of everything. We have to understand the seriousness of what's going on, but we also want to give people capacity and efficacy to feel they can do something and understand what those things are that they could do. And what we come back to a lot with that is understanding where our carbon emissions are coming from, right? So the main source in the United States is transportation. The second source is energy. Also, how we use our land, how we treat our buildings. All of that plays into where our carbon emissions are coming from. At the same time, there have been so many advancements and solutions, and I often like to comment that some of those solutions are also weather. Wind, solar, hydro are also weather.
Let's go back to your television career, 12 plus years, give or take. During your time in TV, and by the way, we go way back, right? You were working at CBS Baltimore, WJZ, and then you left to go work at Climate Central, and I slipped in right in your spot, and you trained me for the TV job, and it was one wonderful time that I had when I worked in Baltimore. And it was, I had some big shoes to step into and fill, stepping into your role. So when we go back to your time in TV, was there one storm in particular, especially when we're talking about extreme weather, that really impacted you and left a lasting impression?
First of all, yes. For those who didn't know, we had that nice connection. So now you know with Chelsea and I, and you've done an amazing job. So
you're too sweet.
For me, there are a bunch of storms that stand out. However, the one I have to come forward with first is Hurricane Irene, because I was pregnant with twins on hospital bed rest as Hurricane Irene passed right over Maryland, central pressure, one of the lowest recorded pressures at the time, lowest for Maryland. And that's when I had my twins. Very early, but that's when I had them. So that storm has to stand out more than any other.
I mean, that's absolutely wild that you went through that. And also wild, I just got to credit you as a mom, having twins, raising them, working full time. Television does not bring the easiest schedule.
It does not. It is wonderful to have people like you and others who are a nice sorority of sorts in this space to work together on it.
Bernadette, there are some meteorologists that stick strictly to the day-to-day forecast, and you've encouraged them to connect it with larger patterns. What difference does that make for viewers and for communities?
There's several ways to get into that question. The first is that in our changing climate, it has changed our weather. So it's part of the weather story at this part. The second is that my goal when I was on air, and I do believe is the goal of many meteorologists, is to keep people safe and prepared. We do that by equipping them and empowering them with information. And this is part of what's happening in the world. Our changing climate is making our weather more extreme. So to help people understand that and connect those dots for them. And the other is, if you look at all of the social science and survey work that's done, to me, the biggest piece of misinformation is we don't think people care about climate change, but that is emphatically false. Work that goes back from George Mason University and Yale University, they've taken this survey twice a year from 2008 till today. They will continue on. And it's called Climate Change of the American Mind. And it breaks down climate change views across America. And when you look at those views, on one side, two really concerned, alarmed groups, and it's well over 50%, almost 60% of the population. On the extreme other side, the dismissives that are not going to be convinced about our changing climate are only about 10% of the population. So even those middle categories may not prioritize this issue, but are open to at least a discussion and genuinely have questions. So if you focus on that dismissive group, you're missing 90% of the population. And in TV, it's about working with our audience and helping them understand what's going on. So we need to help them understand what's going on, answer their questions, connect the dots, because 90% of the population is interested. Another way you can look at that is through different age categories too. And one thing the TV stations are often struggling to do is connect with younger audiences. And they're doing it more so on social and digital media now. But the younger populations are way more convinced that the climate is changing and understand. And the conversation has moved on to, what does that mean to me? What can I do about this? How can I help my community? So helping them understand from the scientific perspective what's going on empowers them and equips them to be safe and prepared.
Now, let's talk for a moment about some of those patterns that we're seeing. Environmental risks like extreme heat, flooding, wildfires, all continuing to escalate. When you look at these changes, what feels most urgent for communities and organizations to prepare for now?
It really depends on where you are, where you live, what your biggest risks are in your community. One area that I do want to highlight, not because it is the most versus others, but heat is our leading weather-related killer. It is the easiest to forecast for. We know a range of solutions to keep people safe, so we should not have the number of deaths that we're having with heat. And in a changing climate, heat is only getting more extreme. It's lasting longer, and it's putting more of a risk on human health and on our power systems that we're now relying to stay safe from that heat. So that's even in a world where we don't have an accurate count of the number of heat deaths, because often when people die of heat, that's not the direct cause. It might be an indirect cause. So it's our leading weather-related killer, and we're still undercounting it. So that is one area that we really need to do better.
Yeah, because I guess heat can bring on a heart attack or a stroke or something like that. And then it gets recorded as, oh, it was death due to this. But really, if it wasn't for the heat, perhaps that wouldn't have even happened.
Exactly.
So when you work with local TV meteorologists through Climate Matters, what do you emphasize about communicating risk to the public?
Well, this is something we've learned that anyone can practice in their communication. And I really want to stress that communication is a climate solution. It is one that we all carry with us everywhere, and we can kick in today. So this is what we've learned that everyone can take with them from this podcast. 1, know your audience. Consider topic, tone, timing. It is the golden rule of communication. 2, meet people where they are. We so often focus on what divides us, but connect on shared values. There's a lot of stuff that really still does connect us in this world. 3, localize and personalize, right? There's this world that's warming. But what does that mean to you in your community? Extreme heat is something different in San Francisco than it is in Arizona. Those numbers, they play out differently. The fourth, simplify. It's great that we want to learn the science and we love science, but not everyone cares that much, but they're still being affected by climate change. So drop the jargon, just like TV meteorologists. They study so many equations to come up with a forecast, or any forecasting meteorologist, not just TV. But then when they explain it to people, it's in very simple terms that are accessible. Same thing with climate change. Keep learning, but simplify. 5, tell a story when and how you can. Not everyone's in a position to be a storyteller, but some are. And that really takes people on a journey. And that can just open hearts and minds. And the last one, don't be afraid. We have science and public opinion on our side. All the social science and surveying science shows people have questions and they are interested. It's only a very small percent of the population that doesn't want to have that conversation. You'll learn it very quickly, but enter that conversation or that communication from a point of thinking. People actually care and want to know. And it's a totally different conversation.
So broadcast meteorologists, one of the most important things that they need to do is build trust, especially when they're talking about these types of topics that can sometimes feel contentious. Have you seen situations where the communication didn't land the way it should have or could have?
Yes. And that happens even outside of this subject, right? And in the world of social media, little misunderstandings can grow into really big issues really quickly. However, you don't have to be perfect to start talking about climate change. You just have to care about people in your community. We're going to stumble at times possibly, but that's a learning experience. So yes, there have been times it has not landed well, but we learn and we grow from there.
And that takes me to my next question. What lessons can we take from those moments? Learning and growing, certainly anything else you can think of.
To the points that we discussed, really trying to connect with people on shared values, meeting them where they are, not talking over them, not approaching them from a point of either underestimating concern or using too much jargon, but to really try to connect with people.
What about all of the clickbait out there? The information, especially on social media, that might not be true science, but it's showing itself as true science. How does Climate Central combat that?
That is a huge challenge for a lot of the world right now. And it's way more than climate science. This is all of our sciences are being challenged in some really fundamental ways. I don't have all the answers here. It's something that as a society, we're going to have to work on. However, for us at Climate Central, being a non-policy group, we document our methodology, we document our sources, we put all of that out there for people to see. And you can go recreate it on your own if you're interested. And for those who don't spend a lifetime thinking about science, that is science. You come up with an observation or a thought. You put it into a hypothesis. You challenge that hypothesis and eventually grows into a theory, or you re-challenge it. And then you grow upon that body of evidence. And that's the whole point of science. So when we have that data out there, when we have the methodologies out there, when we continue to learn and grow, that's the way we approach it.
From your perspective, what are some of the key ingredients that help communities or organizations withstand and recover from extreme weather, especially related to the climate changing?
This is a big topic of conversation right now, especially coming off of what happened in Texas this year, just so awfully. You need, first and foremost, everything comes down to good science. We have a lot of really good science. That's where all of our understanding comes from to take any of the next steps. And that comes from observations, that comes from data, that comes from maintenance of radars and our instrumentation. We need all of it. But from there, you need the full bridge in the emergency management chain to communication and engagement and understanding of relationships on the ground. Because you can have the best forecast in the world, and if it's not getting to the right people in the right ways at the right time, we get tragedy. This is where human beings are really critical and relationships really matter. This is where I come back to communication, how we communicate, who we communicate with, how we collaborate, whether it's a community, whether it's a broader scientific society, whatever that may be. And then that last is called the last mile, right? That on the ground delivering of the information from whatever sources. Technology will help us in some of it, but it still requires the human being in relationships, because if you have that relationship and trust with someone and you get that call at 2 a.m. that water is coming up so quickly, you're likely going to react differently than you would from someone you don't know, you don't trust, or just get a trigger on a phone. So the human component is still really critical in keeping people safe from these events.
And this leads perfectly into the next question. So, looking at the weather enterprise as a whole, broadcasters, agencies, private firms, citizen scientists, if they could work together differently, what one change would most strengthen resilience as a whole?
Honestly, the weather community is one of the few that really has built across the entire enterprise. There are a lot of other areas of science that aren't quite that robust. I mean, we even have a communication branch built into our science. That is really rare for other sciences. So we have done a lot of work as a community. The American Meteorological Society has led a lot of that. The National Weather Association has supported that. And so we've done a lot of work in getting there. Now, is it perfect? No. But this is where I come back to the engagement and the human component. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily the Meteorological Society is undervaluing that, but it's how it's being presented to the world, and with a lot of the challenges and cuts we're seeing to the community as a whole. We need to preserve the human component, the engagement, the relationships. It is so critical to have those, because without those, you start to lose that trust in the science, in academia, research as a whole, in the business sector. And so you need the strength of human relationships and people working together for that to be so robust.
In technology and data, they're evolving so quickly. What excites you most about the future of weather and climate communication?
This is a hard one, because where I see the biggest benefit right now, but it's changing day to day, is in the ability to process big data faster. And that can come through in AI, that can come through in different machine learning. It can come through in a lot of different ways, but there's a lot of pattern recognition in weather that can be processed quicker. And I am not the one fully immersed in that to tell you all the details, but that is where I do see opportunity. The other is how it can support communication systems, not take over. We need to preserve the human component in this, but it does give the ability to get information out quicker and in different ways. And there are some that we're seeing, but it's probably what's going to benefit us most hasn't even been created yet. So it's just changing so rapidly, and it's both. It's from the data and the science side. I mean, we can run models like we've never seen before right now. And at the same time, how do we deliver that in a way that's resonating with people?
Is Climate Central utilizing AI in any new ways lately?
Okay, so we've always done machine learning through the big data side. With our sea level team, we've been able to build in a global data set, a very accurate elevation data set around the world through machine learning. Also, our attribution program, which I forgot to touch on in the beginning here, and a quick thing, and this has been an advancement of the weather science in a climate lens. For those who don't follow along, it's attribution science, extreme event. Attribution science is where we can go in and dissect the role of climate change within individual weather events and all the way down to daily temperatures. And Climate Central has been a part of this community since the beginning. And over the past 20 years, this has evolved very rapidly. The National Academies did a consensus report on this in 2016. They're even doing another one right now, because the science has moved so far, so fast. And it's being applied in so many different ways. And big machine computing has one of the reasons that's allowed us to do this extreme event attribution so rapidly, because we can process a lot of data really fast. So we've been using it a lot more in those ways.
So, looking, say, 5 or 10 years ahead, what's the biggest opportunity you see for the weather enterprise to strengthen resilience overall?
Preserving our human component. I have said it, but even with the technology, it is wonderful and it can get us so far. I mean, I didn't even get into how it can advance satellites and radars and all of our data and collecting that and organizing. And there's so much we can gain from it, but we still need to make sure people understand the risks that are at play, how that's affecting them personally in their community, And the human side of that is so critical. So that is the part that I really want to preserve as we expand at the same time, the technology on this.
And science is complicated, right? So you have to have that human element to help with the interpretation and help to make sure it's interpreted correctly.
Exactly. And with AI, the pattern recognition is, again, I'm not an expert in this part of it, but with our weather patterns changing and things getting more extreme, we have to be able to bring that component in, not just look at what's happened in the past, right? So this changing component also has to come into play, which people know. I'm not putting something out there that people aren't aware of, but that is also where we have to guide this. And it's going to take the best of technology, the advancements of it, plus the interpretation, the assessment, and the understanding of how to break this down into messages that are going to resonate and work. And again, those relationships, they go a really long way in building trust.
It's so important. Tell us, let's switch gears just briefly, something fun. Tell us about some of your more recent travels, because I follow you on social media and I feel like over the past couple of years, you have been all over the world.
Well, I've been lucky to do some really interesting things. Just coming off right now, Climate Week, which is not that far, it's New York City, and a lot of places have spun up their own Climate Weeks, different cities and states. New York City was one of the founders, if not the founder of that. I don't know for certain, but it is the biggest one. And one of the really interesting pieces of it is it brings together anything remotely connected to climate in one city. So you jump from things from the UN to activists, to artists and entertainers, to politicians, to business leaders, to scientists and data, and it's all in one city. And that's so critical, because to really solve our biggest challenges, we need to work across all of these spaces, and together we can go farther, faster. So it is important, and that's one of the things that I've had the opportunity to do. The other is every year there's a big annual climate conference. Many people know it. Those who don't, it's COP, Conference of Parties, and that's under the UN system. That's where the Paris Climate Change Agreement came from. This is an annual event, and it is held around the world, and I've had the opportunity to go to many of those. This year's is in Brazil.
Oh, that's awesome. That should be fun. I can't wait to see and learn about it through your social media. So to close, if you had to give us your forecast for the future, not about tomorrow's weather, but about how we prepare, communicate, and stay resilient in the face of escalating risks, what would it be?
Hopeful forecast as we start to bend the climate curve. We still have those emissions rising and the temperature is still rising. At the same time, so yeah, it's sort of two curves here, right? So you've got solutions that are also accelerating. We need to flip those paths. We need the solutions to outpace our emissions, our carbon pollution, and we need to start bending that climate curve. That will limit our need for resilience. We're still going to need it because we baked in a lot of warming. That will limit even further warming and worsening events.
Well said. Bernadette, thank you so much for sharing your time, your stories, and your insights with us. It's been an honor to have you on the program and helping us launch Behind the Forecast, our new video series from AM's Talking with the Experts podcast. A big thank you to everyone who joined us for this episode of Behind the Forecast. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. We're lining up more episodes with some of the most recognizable and influential names in weather. Or check out some of our most recent episodes where we delve into personal stories and insights from some of the most trusted names in weather, like James Spann of the Alabama Weather Network and Jim Cantori of the Weather Channel. If you enjoyed this content, please be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, I'm Chelsea Ingram, and I'll see you behind the forecast.